The waters of Tonlé Sap are quiet now, but silence has memory. Beneath the lake's placid surface, where lily pads float like forgotten prayers, lies the echo of a war few remember, yet it decided the fate of an empire. Centuries ago, when the Khmer Empire stretched across jungles and rivers like a sleeping giant, the Tonlé Sap was not just a lake, it was a lifeline. Its pulse fed millions, its rhythms ruled calendars, and its depths held gods and ghosts. But power always draws blood, and one monsoon-soaked season, that blood spilled into its waters. This is not just a tale of warriors clashing steel under the tropical sun. It is the story of emperors playing chess with rivers, of generals vanishing into mist, of sacred rituals collapsing under the weight of war. Fishermen became soldiers, temple bells fell silent, crops drowned, and the sky wept over what had once been the beating heart of Southeast Asia. This is the Battle of Tonlé Sap, not just a clash of arms, but the slow drowning of a civilization's soul. Are you ready to step into the water? Part 1. When the waters turned red, the day the empire trembled. Tonlé Sap, a name that once meant life, harvest, fertility, a lake that breathes with the seasons expanding, with the monsoon like the lungs of the earth itself, then shrinking back to a mirror of the sky. But beneath its waters, memory festers. This is where the Khmer Empire's golden veins once ran thick, and where those same veins were severed by war. Before the storm, before the blood, the lake was quiet, a horizon of glass, broken only by the wooden silhouettes of fishing boats and the distant hum of chants from floating shrines. The people of the lake, farmers, monks, weavers, boatwrights, had lived in harmony with its shifting tides for generations. Their lives were dictated by its moods, their rice fields fed by its floods, their gods worshipped in temples built from its bounty. But empires are never satiated. Angkor, the beating capital, needed more rice, more tribute, more bodies for its endless wars to the east and west. And with every tax imposed and every conscription enforced, discontent bubbled beneath the water's surface. At the helm of this disquiet was Jayavarman, the ninth ruler, born not from divine lineage, but from bloodshed and clever alliances. The previous king had died mysteriously, his body found bloated along the Prectinote Canal. Some whispered poison, others saw divine punishment. Jayavarman claimed the throne amid the chaos, his coronation barely cold when rumors of rebellion surfaced in the provinces near Tonlé Sap. The north refused to send its grain, the floating villages withheld tribute, and worst of all, foreign mercenaries had begun to appear among the dissidents. No king can allow insubordination near the empire's lifeline. Tonlé Sap wasn't just a lake, it was the artery that fed Angkor. Whoever controlled the lake controlled the empire. Jayavarman summoned General Suryavarman, a veteran of the Champa campaigns, known for his ruthlessness and loyalty. His orders were simple: suppress the rebellion, reclaim the lake, restore the crown's control at any cost. What the king did not expect was resistance, far stronger than whispers and arrows from the reeds. The rebel leader, a former court astrologer named Khmer, had united the lakeside clans, not just through force but belief. She claimed the spirits of the water had turned against the king, that Angkor had broken the sacred balance, that droughts and floods were not nature's work, but the vengeance of forgotten gods. By the time Suryavarman arrived at the lake's southern delta, rebel boats had formed a blockade. More than 400 war canoes lined the murky water, fitted with makeshift catapults, flaming oil, and shields fashioned from temple doors. It was not a conventional army, but a desperate one. The Empire's seasoned infantry, clad in scaled bronze and trained in formation, could not maneuver in the reeds. On the lake, agility meant everything. The rebels knew the currents, the underwater sandbars, the hidden inlets where imperial ships would run aground, and they used them with precision. On the eve of the first clash, a thick fog rolled across the lake. Suryavarman ordered his men to light floating torches to maintain formation. It was a mistake. The rebels attacked in silence, canoes gliding like shadows, striking the flame-lit boats first. Fire met water in violent convulsion. Screams echoed across the darkness. The lake caught fire. Flaming oil spread across its surface, trapping imperial soldiers in boats that became floating coffins. Some leaped into the water only to be dragged under by rebels, hidden beneath reed mats. Others choked on the smoke, their armor too heavy to swim. By dawn, over 200 men were dead. The water shimmered red, a ghost of the sun rippling through blood. Soryavarman regrouped, furious. He knew now this was no ordinary rebellion, it was a war of attrition, and he was fighting it blind. He sent spies into the floating villages, promising gold for betrayal. He desecrated shrines, accused of harboring rebel sympathies. He drained rice fields to starve them out. Still, they endured. Khmer, the rebel priestess, called forth storms with rituals held deep in the jungle, or so the people believed. Crops failed. Disease spread in the imperial camps. The lake seemed to turn against its own masters. The battle reached its climax during the third full moon of the monsoon season. By then, the lake was swollen, villages flooded, and the empire's patience drowned. Soryavarman ordered a final assault night ambush during the water festival, when the rebels would be distracted by their rituals. The plan was brutal and precise. His forces would attack from 3 directions, torch the floating markets, and capture Khmer alive. As the drums of the festival echoed across the lake, the imperial boats moved silently into position. They struck at midnight, but the rebels were waiting. They had anticipated the betrayal and had laid traps among the submerged banyans and flooded temples. Imperial ships were lured into narrow channels where they became wedged and vulnerable. Then came the fire arrows soaring arcs of orange, followed by the beating of war drums. From the dark emerged wave after wave of rebel boats, oars slashing like fangs. Warriors chanting songs that hadn't been heard since the days of Jayavarman VII. The lake became a battlefield, lit by fire and moonlight, where bodies sank without a sound, and the cries of the wounded vanished into the mist. Soryavarman was struck down during the second hour. His ship had been boarded, his guards overwhelmed. His final words, reportedly, were "The lake is cursed." His head was displayed on a spike in the rebel capital, an abandoned monastery turned fortress floating on bamboo platforms, tied with vines. News of the defeat reached Angkor within days. The king, fearing an uprising in the capital, began executing any noble suspected of harboring sympathies for the rebels. Panic swept through the city. Grain prices tripled. The royal court fell silent, too afraid to speak. But victory did not last for Khmer either. As the monsoon retreated and the waters shrank, the empire regrouped. Another army was raised, this time from the southern provinces. But when they reached Tonlé Sap the following year, there were no rebels to be found. The floating villages had vanished. Entire settlements were burned or abandoned. Khmer had disappeared, her name forbidden to be spoken. The lake was retaken, but it was a hollow victory. The empire never fully recovered its grip. The battle had exposed cracks that would soon widen into collapse. The Battle of Tonlé Sap was not just a conflict, it was a warning. A moment when the empire's lifeblood turned against it. A moment when the lake that had given everything demanded a toll in return. In the years that followed, Angkor's irrigation systems began to fail. Droughts followed floods, and floods followed droughts. The canals clogged. The gods fell silent. And slowly, the empire receded like the monsoon tide. The waters of Tonlé Sap are quiet now, but some nights, when the wind rises just right, locals say you can hear the drums, the ghost oars slapping the water, the chant of warriors long vanished, and always the sound of breathing deep and slows, if the lake itself remembers. Part 2. Echoes of a drowned throne strategy, sacrifice, and the silent collapse. Tonlé Sap had bled, and though the crown reclaimed the lake, the wound beneath never truly closed. What followed was not a triumphant return of order, but the beginning of an unraveling so gradual, so quiet, that few noticed it happening until the silence was all that remained. The empire survived, but something in it had died. Jayavarman X tightened his grip, but like water slipping through clenched fists, control eluded him. The battle had left scars not only on the bodies of his soldiers, but on the land itself. The floating villages never returned to their former size. Markets that once bustled with the sound of bartering and bronze smithing stood empty. Trade routes along the lake slowed to a crawl. Fishermen spoke of dead zones where no catch would come, as if the lake had turned its back on them. Crops wilted prematurely, wells went brackish. Rituals once used to summon rain failed, even when conducted with flawless precision. The high priests blamed the stars, the peasants blamed the king. Yet the deeper truth was more terrifying. Tonlé Sap. The empire's heart had lost its rhythm, and when the heart falters, the body follows. Strategically, the lake had once offered a natural defense and an abundant source of rice, fish, and transport. It was the empire's breadbasket, shield, and artery. But now, it was a liability. Maintaining a military presence on the lake drained resources. Rebuilding the canal systems that had been sabotaged during the rebellion proved nearly impossible. Mudslides from unchecked deforestation clogged the vital arteries that once brought seasonal waters to Angkor's Great Berets. The majestic reservoirs, engineering marvels that had once shimmered like mirrors to the heavens, began to stagnate, crack, and crumble. The priests warned that this was divine retribution. The engineers, if they dared speak, said the water was simply changing. Neither explanation comforted the starving. And yet, the empire kept building. Stone temples rose even as villages burned. Towering monuments were carved with scenes of victories that never happened. Kings depicted with halos of godhood, while in reality they trembled behind palace walls. The kingdom's face looked strong, but its bones had begun to rot. After the Battle of Tonlé Sap, the surrounding provinces became restless. The Khmer people to the east seized the moment to raid the fringes of the empire. In the north, Thai warbands tested the borders with impunity. Even the jungle itself seemed to reclaim what had been taken from uprooted split stone. Vines overran forgotten shrines, and entire roads disappeared beneath a curtain of green. But perhaps the most damning collapse was not physical, it was belief. For centuries, the divine right of the Khmer kings had been unchallenged. They were not simply rulers, they were gods in human form, the earthly embodiments of Vishnu, Shiva, and the great Devaraja. The empire's vast bureaucracy, temples, and armies were all extensions of this divine order. But the Battle of Tonlé Sap changed something fundamental. It showed that the gods could be resisted, that rebels could win, that even water could be turned against heaven. The priestess Khmer, whether dead, exiled, or hidden, became legend. In remote villages, people carved her likeness in wood and hid it in shrines behind household altars. Children whispered her name as a warning to the proud. "Beware the wrath of the lake," they said, "for it remembers her." Even in Angkor itself, where court scribes rewrote the history of the battle into a minor skirmish, rumors persisted. Servants passed stories in hushed tones. A statue of Jayavarman IX reportedly cracked during an eclipse, and no one dared repair it. Foreign diplomats from Siam and Dai Viet observed the shift, noting that the once commanding empire now ruled more through fear than faith. And when faith dies, rebellion is not far behind. There was no single moment when the Khmer Empire fell. There was no final battle where flags were lowered and kings wept before foreign swords. It was quieter than that, more haunting. A slow erosion of will, of resources, of the very identity that had once made the empire shine like a jewel in the jungle. And it all began with the lake. Tonlé Sap, in many ways, had been the empire's original promise. Its flood cycle, perfectly in rhythm with the monsoon, allowed for 3 rice harvests, a year unheard of in other kingdoms. This agricultural bounty made possible the rise of Angkor, its sprawling temples, its armies, its conquests. But that same water, when misused, became the empire's undoing. Mismanagement of the lake's ecosystem during and after the conflict led to massive fish die-offs. Deforestation for military purposes altered sediment flows, and as the infrastructure weakened, so did the empire's ability to feed itself. Worse still, the psychological impact of the battle lingered like fog over the capital. Future rulers became increasingly obsessed with omens, commissioning thousands of astrologers and seers. Court decisions stalled, battles were delayed, temple constructions were paused mid-build at the slightest sign of ill fortune. One king, it is said, refused to step outside the palace walls for 7 years, fearing Khmer's ghost had cursed the land, and so, while other powers rose like Ayutthaya to the west, and the growing influence of the Chinese trade networks to the north, the Khmer Empire withered, not with a cry, but a breathless sigh. Centuries later, when French explorers stumbled upon Angkor's ruins, they believed it to be a lost city. They could not fathom how such monumental architecture had come from a civilization that had vanished so completely. But the locals knew. They remembered. The old ones spoke of the time when the lake had turned red, when the gods left, when the empire drowned, not in enemy blood, but in its own silence. And even today, Tonlé Sap remains restless. In the rainy season, it still expands to swallow the plains. In the dry, it retreats, as if exhaling a secret. Fishermen still speak of strange shadows beneath the water, of boats seen drifting with no one aboard. On certain nights, the drums return soft, rhythmic, pulsing through the mist, and sometimes, when the moon is high and the lake is still, you can see a flicker of flame upon the surface like the ghost of a war that refuses to sink. The Battle of Tonlé Sap was never just a battle. It was a mirror held to a dying empire, a reflection of its pride, its desperation, and its unwillingness to listen to its people, to its priests, to its lake. And like all mirrors, it shattered. In its reflection, we see a warning. Civilizations rise not just by conquest, but by harmony between ruler and ruled, between land and water, between belief and truth. When that balance is broken, even the greatest empire can be undone, not by sword or fire, but by the soft turning of the tide. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.